At funerals, and I attended one today, we often talk about how the deceased person's life impacted those who were around them. And it seems that we have a tremendous need to assign significance to a person's life before we lower that casket into the ground. And I guess really when you stop to think about it, the worst thing that could be said is that this person's life had no meaning whatsoever. And indeed, when we come to the end of life's way, we want to know that we have lived a life of significance. But exactly what does that mean tonight? And what do we need to be doing now for that to be true? Well, let me say that from a biblical standpoint, that a significant life is one that counts for time and eternity. And so in that sense, it is one that makes a difference both for ourselves as well as others as well. Now, when you stop to think about it, that is the very opposite of mediocrity. The dictionary defines mediocre as being moderate to low quality, average. And I fear this evening that too many members of the church are satisfied with being just an average Christian, if you please. In other words, they want to put forth only enough effort to maintain their membership, or as we sometimes say, to be on the church row. But it seems that they never really strive for excellence in spiritual matters and in living for the Lord. And yet we find that this was exactly what the Apostle Paul was exhorting us to do. That is, to put forth our all, to put forth our very best in living for Jesus Christ in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verses 24 through verse 27. Now, when you read those words, it's obvious that Paul did not settle for mediocrity in his spiritual life, and of course neither should we. But instead, he was determined to put forth his very best in order that he might gain that incorruptible crown of eternal life that he talked about in verse 26. And I believe that in these verses, in a very detailed, methodical way, that Paul tells us how to live a life of significance. And as I said, when we come to the end of life's way, we want to know that we have lived that kind of life, a life that is counted for both time and for eternity. It is said one time that a psychiatrist said to his patient, he said, we rarely use the word cure, but he said, after 5 years of therapy, it is my pleasure to pronounce you cured. And would you believe that there was an unhappy look that came over her face? And this kind of surprised the psychiatrist. And so he said, what's wrong? I thought that you would be thrilled at that. And the lady said, well, you know, that's fine for you. But she said, 5 years ago, I was Joan of Arc, but now I'm nobody. You know what? Nobody wants to be a nobody. But what I want you to understand tonight is this, that no faithful Christian, no faithful servant of God will be a nobody in the day of judgment. Now, we may never see our name on the society page in the newspaper, but you know what? When we hear Jesus call our name on that day, when the Lamb's Book of Life, as it were, is opened up and the roll is called up yonder, as the song says that we have sung through the years, and we hear our name called out in the day of judgment, then of course we're going to know that it was worth it all to live for the Lord and to be the Christian that we needed to be. I want you to realize that the real nobodies on that day are going to be those who hear Jesus say, I know you not. Or maybe in some instances, he will actually say that I never knew you. But you know what? If our names are written in heaven, as Jesus said in Luke 10 and verse 20, and if we are known of God, then of course that is all that is going to really matter in the great by and by. And indeed that will be the ultimate test of whether or not we have lived a significant life. So what I want to do this evening in the time that I have remaining is just look at some things that Paul declares in those verses that I've already referred to in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Obviously, I don't have enough time to go into great detail into all that is said, but let me just kind of make some major points about it tonight. And I want to begin by saying, first of all, that Paul indicates that if we're going to live that significant life, then we need to have the right kind of ambition. Ambition. You know what? I almost hesitate to use that word in this first point because it has such a bad connotation attached to it. However, I want you to understand that I'm not talking about a worldly spirit where a person is driven to achieve money and fame and fortune and what have you, maybe even if it means losing their soul. But as I said, I'm talking about having the right kind of ambition. The word ambition simply refers to an eager or strong desire to achieve something. And really, when you stop to think about it, that is necessary for success in any area of life. And I believe this is what Paul is referring to in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 24. Listen to what he says. He says, "Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize." Now here it is. He says, "So run that ye may obtain." What does Paul say? Run this Christian race that you may win, if you please. That you may gain the victory. That you may win that prize that we're going to receive at the end of life's way if we have been found faithful by God. Of course, Paul here is comparing the Christian life to a race in the athletic games. And certainly the illustration was not wasted on the Corinthians, because this took place at Corinth every 2 years. Understand really that it was second in importance only to the Olympian Games. And I believe that there are several great lessons that we can learn from this as we think about the Christian life from this perspective, that it is a race. Remember, the writer of Hebrews says, "Let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith." What does this tell us? It tells us several things. First of all, it indicates that the Christian life is not a spectator sport. It is a race that all of us are expected to run. And that means tonight that this is something that we must do for ourselves, that really no one else can do for us. Paul indicates that when he wrote to the church of Philippi in Philippians 2 and verse 12, and he said that you're to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. There's certain things I've got to do for myself tonight that really no one else can do for me, and one of those things is to run with patience the race that I am involved in. But you know, secondly, it emphasizes, and I think this is important to consider, listen now, we're not competing against each other. In fact, Paul says that this is a difference between the Christian race and the Corinthian games. When it comes to earthly races and those kind of games, Paul says only one receiveth the prize. And we know that's right. In an earthly race, only one person can come in first place. But Paul says, in regard to the Christian race, that there is awaiting each of us a crown of life for all of those who cross the finish line successfully. Every one of us can receive that crown of life. And in fact, Paul declared that in 2 Timothy 4 and verses 7 through 8. He said, "I have finished my course." He's coming to the end of his life. He knows that his life is soon going to be snuffed out by his persecutors. And Paul said, I have finished my course. Literally, he's saying, I have finished this race that I have been involved in. And he went on to say, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me in that day. And then he said, not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. You know, here is the reason why that we need to get rid of the wrong kind of ambition. Because certainly a competitive spirit that leads us to undercut one another is not the kind of ambition that we should have. We should not be seeking to exalt ourselves at the expense of others. After all, we're not in a race against each other. That's something we need to remind ourselves, brethren. We're not racing against each other. We're all on the same team, if you please. And therefore, we should be helping and we should be encouraging one another. But the third point that I want to make, and really I think this is the main point that Paul was making, and that is, listen, we are in the Christian race to win. That's why we're running this race. I want to tell you tonight, if that's not true, then we're wasting our time. If you're not here tonight because you want to go to heaven, if you're not doing the things that you are doing spiritually and religiously because you want to receive that crown of life that fadeth not away, then really you're about it for the wrong reason. We are running in order to gain that prize of victory that is in Jesus Christ. You know, I'm told that the prize in Paul's day was a garland wreath that they would receive. And of course that was a symbol of their victory. But Paul says in verse 25 that it was a corruptible crown, because obviously that garden wreath with time would waste away and would decay. But Paul says we have a crown that is awaiting us that is incorruptible. Incorruptible, that fadeth not away. The Bible would say elsewhere, that is reserved in heaven for us. And so before I bring this to a conclusion tonight, I want to just simply pose this question. And that is, dear Christian, as you are running this race, are you running to win? Are you running because you want to go to heaven? You know what, believe it or not, there are people who sometimes run in a race or maybe a marathon, and really they do it for different reasons. Sometimes they run just to be running. They're not really running in order to win, in order to come in first place. This is especially true of the Boston Marathon. You know, I'm told the Boston Marathon involves some 26 miles. You got to be in pretty good shape. If you expect to actually win it, you've got to be in pretty good shape if you want to just finish that particular marathon. There are people every year that sign up and get involved in the Boston Marathon, and they're not doing that because they're going to come in first place. They know they're not going to come in first place. They know they're not strong enough and they're not fast enough to actually win it. They just want the experience. They get in the Boston Marathon with the idea that if I can just endure this and eventually cross the finish line, no matter how long it takes me, then that will be satisfaction enough. You know, when our oldest grandchild, Kara, was in kindergarten, she was only 5 years of age. She signed up to run in a race along with other students in the area schools at Joplin here in Missouri. The track meet took place at the stadium across from Missouri Southern State University. And you know, as we were sitting in the stands as grandparents and the parents and other members of the family, and we watched her as she went around that track and she was running at 5 years of age, it became obvious she wasn't running in order to win. That wasn't really her intention. It wasn't her intention that she was going to come in first place. You know how I know that? because she was too nonchalant about it. I can see her in my mind's eye right now. She's running and she's kind of moving like this in slow motion and just kind of bouncing along and headed toward the finish line. But you know what? She was satisfied with just the idea, I'm going to cross the finish line. I'm part of this race and I want to finish it. I'm going to run it until the very end. You know what? That's all right, I guess, for a 5-year-old. And I'll tell you, as grandparents, Judy and I, we couldn't have been more proud of her for just simply doing that. But you know what? That's not the idea that Paul is presenting here. That's not the picture that Paul is portraying here when Paul says, you are in this race and I want you to win, I want you to race, I want you to run in order to win. And don't give up. I want you to reach down and I want you to give it your all. I want you to focus on what is spiritual and what is eternal. As the writer says, run with patience the race that is set before you. That's what you do in a marathon. A person who wins a marathon is not necessarily the swiftest or the one who gets off the fastest, but is the one who reaches down and is able to endure. And yes, there are times when undoubtedly he gets tired and he thinks maybe I ought to just quit, but he continues on. Why? Because he wants to cross that finish line so that he can actually win the race. Listen, that's what we're going to have to do. If when we come to the end of our life, we want to realize that we have lived a significant life, a life of significance for both time and eternity.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved